You're still here? You reek of old age, go home already. This harsh outburst came from our oldest son's wife at their housewarming party. My husband and I, who had come to celebrate our son's new home, were shocked by her audacity. Our son got up from his seat. He must have been trying to calm his wife down. But beside me, my husband muttered quietly, "Shall we bring this house down?" At his words, our daughter-in-law's arrogant smile turned into a surprised gasp. Little did she know at the time that it wasn't just the house that was at stake, but her entire life as well. My name is Jacqueline Green. I'm 64 years old. I married my husband, Sam, and moved into his family home where we lived a contented life. We were blessed with 2 sons, Robert and Ted. Both of them have grown up to have families of their own and are doing well. As for Sam and me, all we want is to live out our remaining years in peace and happiness. However, there's one little thing that bothers us. It's our oldest son's wife, Alice. From the moment I first met her, I didn't have a good impression. Alice was 24 when she first came over to introduce herself before marrying our son. Although she greeted us at the door with a hello, there was no smile on her face. "Let me see, you're Alice, right?" As she hadn't introduced herself, I asked my son just to be sure. At my question, Alice scowled. "What? Does Robert have other women?" Both Robert and I were taken aback. "What are you talking about? Of course not." Robert hastily reassured her. "Well, then why did you need to confirm my name?" But Alice started to argue right there on the doorstep. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that." I nervously tried to calm the situation. Even though she was young, I couldn't help but think she lacked common sense, but hoped that time in marriage would improve things. That's what I thought at the time. Both families met, and everything proceeded smoothly. Alice's parents seemed like very nice people. They run a small electrical shop together, and they gave off a good vibe. I thought positively that Alice's initial behavior was perhaps due to her love for Robert. After their wedding, the couple moved to an apartment nearby. A few years later, our younger son, Ted, also decided to get married. It was a bit of a shotgun wedding. At the time, Ted was still in college, and his bride-to-be, Megan, was 20 and working at home after finishing high school. Honestly, we were worried. We had no idea what kind of girl was going to come into our lives, but when we first met Megan, she came with a gift and introduced herself politely at the door. I was surprised. Although we had thought that Alice's behavior was due to her youth, Megan, who was even younger, was very polite and respectful. There were some concerns about how their relationship began, but Megan seemed like a wonderful and kind girl. In the time leading up to their wedding, Megan visited us many times. She always offered to help out around the house. Of course, we couldn't let her do that, but we were incredibly touched by her thoughtfulness. The second son's wife's family owned a small construction company. The second son, who was still in college, decided to drop out and start working there. And then, a beautiful baby girl was born to the couple. When the baby turned 6 months old, they decided to hold a belated wedding ceremony. Of course, the eldest son and his wife attended the ceremony. However, the eldest son's wife looked sullen the whole time. Despite being a part of the family, she was constantly on her phone, never leaving her seat. Both my husband and I wanted to talk to her, but we could tell she gave off a vibe that said, "Don't talk to me." The wedding ceremony went smoothly, but the problem arose after that. Since they have a small baby, they decided not to have an after party. So we suggested, why not have a small after party at our house? The second son and his wife were thrilled. We prepared snacks and appetizers, and the eldest son and his wife joined us at our house. However, a commotion ensued there. "That was a lovely wedding. Megan looked beautiful," said the eldest son. Of course, those kind words made the atmosphere pleasant. But it was the eldest son's wife who completely shattered the calm atmosphere. "What are you saying? Who are you calling beautiful? Are you cheating on me?" She angrily confronted her husband. Everyone was stunned by her overreaction. But I quickly snapped out of it and tried to calm her down, saying, "Alice, calm down. Robert didn't mean it that way." But it seems like that was a mistake. Now I became the target of her anger. Alice glared at me and shouted, "How did you raise him to be such a cheater? Isn't it your fault for raising him this way?" And then she lunged at me. "Alice, calm down. Alice, please stop. Enough is enough." The children and my husband stepped in to restrain Alice. I immediately told Megan to take the baby somewhere safe and asked her to leave the room. Looking at Alice, who was panting heavily from her outburst, I was sure. Alice must dislike all of us, no, everyone involved with Robert. She sees only Robert, for better or worse. We decided it would be better for Robert's sake to distance ourselves from them. And so we have kept a minimal relationship with them up to now. After the incident, I told Robert, "Don't you think it might be better to divorce?" To which he replied, "I've thought about that too." But when I mentioned it, Alice apologized in tears. After receiving words of apology from her, both my husband and I decided to leave the matter to the two of them. Despite the ups and downs, our eldest son and his wife celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Since they didn't have children, we didn't have many opportunities to meet with our eldest son and his wife, but we figured it was better to go on without any confrontations causing issues. Both my husband and I thought the same. Then one day, our eldest son contacted us. He said that he had decided to start his own business, focusing on the development of a game he had been working on as a hobby. In other words, our eldest son was going to be the CEO. He said he didn't need a large office to develop his app game, but he would hire a few employees and each of them would work from home. Because there would occasionally be a need for meetings, he told us he was planning to build a new house with a small meeting room and his own workspace. My husband and I were very happy to hear that our eldest son was turning his hobby into his career and looking towards the future. And a few months later, a mansion was completed. We were invited to the housewarming party along with our second son's family. It had been several years since we last met our eldest son's wife. But she was already a fine adult. I thought there wouldn't be any problems like before. Thinking that, we brought our congratulations and visited our eldest son's home. "Hello, excuse us." When I rang the bell, my eldest son came out to greet us. When he said that, we were guided inside the house. The eldest son who greeted us said, "This is the conference room. This is the workspace. And this is the living area. It's properly locked." And led us to the living room while showing us around the house. "Oh, it's lovely." I looked around the room. Following behind me were my husband and the family of our second son, both of whom were following me with a smile. A meal was prepared in the living room. However, I didn't see my eldest son's wife. "Where is Alice?" I asked my eldest son. But he didn't want to talk about her. In the end, we started eating without her, and my husband and second son each gave their housewarming gifts to our eldest son. "You didn't have to do all this." My eldest son was grateful, but he accepted with thanks, saying it was a celebration. The second son's family had one more child since then, and the older child was already in elementary school. The younger child was still 2 years old. Both of them were excited about the new house. That's when it happened. There was a noise upstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps and the sound of someone coming down the stairs. "What? Alice was here?" I called out to my eldest son, but he didn't answer. Then, when she entered the living room, she frowned when she saw us. "Alice, hello, it's been a while." I called out to her like that. But she was still looking sullen as usual. And then she said to us, "You're still here? You reek of old age, go home already." Alice's harsh words froze the warm atmosphere in the room. "Hey, Alice. How can you say such a thing?" Robert chastised his wife Alice. But it was clear Alice had no intention of taking his reprimand to heart. "Well, it's the truth, isn't it? Our brand new house is getting tarnished because of them. I told you not to invite them over." And what, are you some big shot CEO now? Hanging around with some old codger who keeps working past retirement, and people who are so average they had a shotgun wedding after dropping out of college. We live in completely different worlds. I was speechless, and so was my second son's family. Even my grade school grandchild was struck dumb in surprise. I had made various excuses, attributing her behavior to her youth or excessive affection for my eldest son, but that was my mistake. Something essential to her humanity is missing. She lacks warmth and kindness towards others. It's not that she loves my eldest son the most, she loves herself above all else, and values her status as the wife of a company president more than anything. I was furious. I couldn't stand silent anymore. As I was about to retort, my husband, who had been listening to the argument between my eldest son and his wife, let out a sigh. My husband, usually calm and gentle, said, "Maybe we should just tear this house down." At my husband's words, my eldest son, second son's family, and I involuntarily looked at him. Nobody could believe that such words had come out of my husband's mouth. In the midst of this, only my eldest son's wife let out a surprised gasp. "What? Do you even understand what you're saying?" Alice, my eldest son's wife, said. "Of course I do. A house designed by me and built by Ted might be better off not existing," my husband replied. "What?" Alice was stunned at my husband's words. "I'm sure you, as the president's wife, wouldn't be satisfied with such a house designed by an old man and built by someone beneath ordinary. Our worlds are different. You should just move out." My husband's calm tone was ironically scary. Knowing this, none of us could interrupt the conversation between my husband and Alice. "What do you mean?" Alice started to tremble at his words. And she glared at my eldest son. Noticing her gaze, my eldest son sighed and said to Alice, "It means exactly what he says. This house was designed by my father, a top architect. And the contractor is Megan's family home, with the foreman being Ted. I may hold a title and be a president, but I neither have substantial wealth nor reputation yet. Thanks to my family, I could own such a wonderful house. Rather, among us, we are the most ordinary, or even beneath ordinary." Alice turned pale at my eldest son's words. She must not have known. But even if she didn't know, didn't she ever wonder? There's no way our eldest son's income and savings alone could have built such an impressive house. My husband didn't even charge for the design work, and there's hardly any profit for our second son's in-laws, who run a construction company. I can't thank enough to our second son's in-laws, who helped us simply because we're family. Yet our eldest son's wife has the audacity to act pompous just because of her husband's status. Who does she think she is? Saying that we're less than average? Our eldest son's wife repeated his words as if she couldn't believe them. You can see the despair on her face. Indeed, my husband still works for a company even after his retirement, but that's because the company asked him to stay on as a top-tier architect. Our second son is being groomed as the next boss at his wife's family business. He gets good treatment not just from his coworkers but also from the business partners that his wife's family has had relationships with for years, and even though he's not yet the president, he's working hard for the company. Yeah, in this group, I'm the bottom of the barrel. A wife who misunderstands that and looks down on people is even lower. With those words, our eldest son laughed, looking at his wife, whose face had turned blue as if she was about to cry at any moment. Our second son also started laughing involuntarily, but the atmosphere was anything but pleasant. Our second son's wife quickly picked up on the mood and took their child to a nearby dollar store. She's really good at reading the room and is very considerate. Apologize to Dad and Mom properly, if you understand. Our eldest son stopped laughing and yelled at his wife. What? Am I really that bad? You're always on their side. It's only natural for a husband to side with his wife. But our eldest son's wife, who can't accept the reality, fights back. Sure, that's right. But it's also a husband's job to point out when his wife is wrong. You're wrong. If you have a complaint, quit being my wife right now. Seeing our eldest son truly angry, she must have realized that she was in trouble. Our eldest son's wife quickly changed her attitude and conspicuously knelt down. I didn't know. You never told me. She's acting like a tragic heroine. And then, as if intoxicated by her own performance, she turned to my husband and me and began to apologize. I'm really sorry for the rude things I've said. We watched our eldest son's wife's act with a blank expression, not even feeling a shred of sympathy. Her overly dramatic apology didn't touch our hearts at all, and it's too late to apologize anyway. We had no intention of accepting her superficial apology, just like last time. Seeing his wife in this state, our eldest son asked me, Dad, Mom, what do you think? Am I terrible? Am I doing something wrong? My husband looked at me. He must have realized that I had something to say to her. I let her have it. I couldn't forgive her for her previous remarks, no matter what. No, Robert. I think you're right. If a wife disrespects her family, it's a husband's duty to correct her. I will reflect and change my attitude. Our eldest son's wife kept up her melodramatic act. I couldn't help but be exasperated. No, Alice. This is not the first time you've been disrespectful to us, is it? Haven't you been told this every time by Robert? No, Robert must have pointed out your words every time, right? What about that? At my words, our eldest son's wife bit her lip, turning pale. I told her, I don't need someone who belittles my husband and son in the Green family. It would be better for both of us to cut ties. Jacqueline! A desperate voice from our eldest son's wife. In our 15 years of marriage, it was the first time she called my name. We live in different worlds. I threw her words back at her. At those words, our eldest son's wife collapsed on the spot and froze as if her spirit had left her body. She might be regretting her actions a little bit. Being told that we live in different worlds must have been a significant blow to our eldest son's wife. Even though they were her own words, I wonder why she was so affected by them. Although I thought that, my second son said, Mom, you were really cool. It seemed to be quite a shocking remark for Alice. In the end, my eldest son, Robert, decided to divorce his wife, Alice. Alice, who loved Robert so much. When Robert proposed, if you want to stay with me, Alice, you need to start working and contribute to the mortgage for this house we got at a reduced rate, Alice turned bright red with anger. It seemed that at the time of their marriage, Robert had told her, I want my wife to be a homemaker. Alice, who was under the impression that being a homemaker would mean living an easy life, started to feel insecure, worried that her status might be taken away by someone. Despite this, she decided to forsake personal growth and started to bind Robert instead of supporting him as a wife. On top of that, she decided not to have children, apparently because it would be too much trouble. Alice loved herself more than she loved Robert. With Robert becoming the CEO, her arrogance only grew, and perhaps her overblown pride has finally been broken. I'm sorry, I'll do anything, please forgive me. Alice begged, sobbing, at the end. But when Robert suggested, all right, then Alice should start working and contribute to the household expenses. It was disrespectful to say such things when we're getting it for a reduced price. Isn't that sincerity? Alice turned bright red and started to scream and get angry. Are you telling me to work? That's not what we promised when we got married. Isn't this fraud? Robert seemed utterly dumbfounded at her words. For a few years now, Robert had realized that Alice was more attached to this comfortable lifestyle of not working than she was to him. Thinking this couldn't go on, he had subtly suggested several times that she find a job or a hobby and get out of the house. Then, are you cheating on me? She would accuse Robert, and in recent years, she even nagged at him just for talking to women at work. This affected his work and the business. If he mentioned family matters, it would sour her mood, and of course, he wasn't even talking about home. Their conversation itself had decreased. Robert regretted his lack of judgment and allowing her to have her way for 15 years, but he could only think that it was good that he had realized this now. Life still has a long way to go. Robert can start over as many times as he wants. Alice, who was kicked out by Robert, reluctantly returned to her parents' home. Her parents, taken by surprise, contacted Robert. That's when they first learned about the situation. Alice's parents, being sensible people, didn't excuse their daughter's actions. Knowing the insult to us, Alice's parents brought her and a box of sweets to apologize. Now, apologize. Alice's parents scolded her in front of us. No, it's okay, an apology won't undo the divorce, my husband said. Upon hearing that, Alice's parents said, Of course. We couldn't ask such a wonderful family to accept a daughter who has been so rude. We'll re-educate her properly. We're sorry for the trouble we've caused. We really had no idea. We're truly sorry. Alice watched her parents in a bad mood. Alice's parents, furious at her attitude, forced her to apologize. It was like a grade schooler's apology. But unlike a grade schooler, forcing mature parents to apologize for their grown-up daughter's actions was pitiful. Really, it's okay, I said, feeling sorry for Alice's parents. Afterwards, Alice refused to return to her parents' home and was forcibly made to rent an apartment nearby. She started working to pay her own rent. Apparently, our second son's wife, Megan, spotted her working at the supermarket. She was being scolded by a student part-timer. Being scolded by a part-timer younger than herself must be a good lesson for her. Her parents are watching over her life, making sure she doesn't cause trouble for others in the future. Compared to before, her life must feel quite constricted, but even being able to live like this is fortunate. Alice, who until now had only scorned others without realizing her own happiness. She will need some harsh realities and difficulties until she can appreciate her current situation. Afterwards, my husband and I, free from worry, are living a peaceful retirement. We are a little worried about Robert being single, but his brother Sam's family is nearby. They are brothers who truly respect each other. I am confident they will support each other when necessary. Robert's company also seems to be doing well. He is steadily increasing the number of employees and continuing to grow his business. Seeing Robert now, free to pursue his passion, he seems more lively and vibrant compared to before. Without having to walk on eggshells around anyone, we are now able to communicate freely with our children, and they even take us on a vacation once a year. I am constantly grateful for such a luxurious everyday life. By recognizing the small happiness in everyday life, I feel that life itself has been a joy. Both my husband and I are leading our lives in such a way that, when it's time for us to depart, we can truly say we've had a happy life. Ew, it's bloody and dirty. I really hate this. My mother-in-law laughed, pointing at my head. I had collapsed from heatstroke, brought on by being ordered to clean the garden under the scorching sun by my mother-in-law. Where I fell was rather unfortunate, and I hit my head hard on a garden stone. There was so much blood coming from my head that it was all over my palm. Thinking about who caused me to collapse just adds to my headache. I've been feeling nauseous the whole time, and even dizzy. In this state, it's not just driving that's out of the question, even walking is impossible. So, I called an ambulance, but my mother-in-law started giggling when she saw my call history. You called an ambulance for this? Young people are such a hassle. I wonder if they know that real emergencies are being overlooked because of idiots who call ambulances for stupid things. You should have gone on your own. Saying this, my mother-in-law dragged me by my arm, forced me to stand up, and put me in her car. As angry as I was with my mother-in-law for calling me dirty, it's true that it would be helpful if she could take me to the hospital. I reluctantly thanked her for dragging me, the injured party, around. Thank you very much. It's fine, dear, because you're going to the hospital by yourself. She laughed and turned the steering wheel. But the direction she turned was not towards the hospital. Wait, what's up ahead? My name is Sophia, I'm 28. I work as an office worker from Monday to Friday. When I finished work and was watching TV at home, my cell phone rang. The call was from my friend Emma, who had moved to New York with me. "Sophia, are you free after work next Friday? I hang out with Emma about once or twice a month. There's a drinking party, do you want to come?" With no particular plans in mind, I quickly agreed to go. That's where I met Lucas, who was 4 years older than me. We both loved traveling, and we hit it off talking about the places we visited, so we exchanged contact information. From that day on, I started talking on the phone and emailing with Lucas every day, and we started hanging out on our days off. I had so much fun spending time with Lucas that no amount of time was enough. We were attracted to each other, and about half a year later, we started dating. After we started dating, we traveled domestically and abroad, and made a lot of memories together. About 2 years into dating, we got married. Right after we got married, Lucas was transferred, and I quit my job and became a housewife. Lucas works for a big company, so he's likely to be transferred in the future as well. We immediately started looking for a new place to live. A few days after the transfer was decided, my mother-in-law called me on my cell phone. Immediately upon answering the phone, I was asked, "Sophia, do you have a moment?" To which I responded, "Hello, mother-in-law, it's been a while. I'm free to chat. My husband has injured his leg. We heard you're moving from New York to our area, and I was wondering if you could consider living with us. I'm having a hard time taking care of my husband by myself. It would be a great relief if you were here." And so, she proposed that we live together. Though my father-in-law insisted he was fine because his injury wasn't too severe, his gentle nature made him a man who wouldn't complain even when in pain. Both my husband Lucas and I became worried about him, and decided to move in together. I had visited my in-laws' home once before for a marriage meeting, and it was so large that it seemed it could serve as an inn. Despite the parents-in-law downplaying it as just a country house, it was obviously more magnificent than most other homes. The abundance of rooms was also a factor in our decision to move in. I'd met my father-in-law several times since dating Lucas, and we'd grown close over shared conversations about our mutual love for sweets. About a month after moving in, my father-in-law's injury was healing well and it seemed he would be fully recovered soon. However, during a light exercise session while organizing the storage, he accidentally dropped a heavy object onto his injured leg, causing a fracture. He was immediately taken to the hospital where it was determined he needed surgery and would need to be hospitalized for about 6 months. After completing the hospital admission procedures and bringing back some clothes, I returned home to find my mother-in-law standing at the entrance. "Mother-in-law, I'm back. I'll get started on dinner now." I greeted her with my usual smile, but she stared at me coldly and retorted, "What took you so long? You're so slow it's annoying." I was stunned and couldn't comprehend what had just happened. As I stood there, she flared her eyes and barked at me. "What are you standing around for? Go make dinner!" With that, I hurried to the kitchen to start preparing dinner. The moment my father-in-law was hospitalized, my previously kind mother-in-law underwent a complete transformation. I initially thought she was just in a bad mood, but from that day on, she started bullying me behind my husband's back. When my father-in-law was home, my mother-in-law used to prepare breakfast while I took care of lunch and dinner. But now, I was responsible for all meals and all household chores. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law stopped doing any chores and spent more time watching TV or sleeping till noon. When she was awake, I would get nagged about how the food was too salty or how my cleaning was sloppy. Since the house was large, cleaning alone took a considerable amount of time. The hardest part was managing the yard and garden. Being in the country, both the yard and garden were quite large and dealing with the weeds was a real struggle. They used to hire professionals for the maintenance, but now I was in charge. If any weed was left untouched, my mother-in-law would scold me. I initially endured it, but realizing that I won't have time for our child once they're born, I confided in Lucas. He took my side and spoke to my mother-in-law. "Instead of reflecting on your own shortcomings, you've roped Lucas into your scheme. If you were more efficient with your chores, none of this would be necessary. Do you enjoy making me out to be the villain? Really, what an ungrateful daughter-in-law you are," she retorted, increasing her verbal abuse. No matter what we said, my mother-in-law wouldn't listen, and so we decided to move out. However, we had missed the spring moving season, and there were hardly any apartments available. And the ones that were available were too far from Lucas's workplace, so we decided to move into a new apartment that was nearing completion and would soon be open for applications. From spring, past the rainy season, the season turned to summer. I woke up to the energetic sound of cicadas and started preparing breakfast for my husband and mother-in-law. After sending off my husband, I was about to return to my room when my mother-in-law blocked my path and threw a sarcastic comment at me, complaining about the breakfast not tasting good or the dishes not being cleaned properly. As I was hanging my head, hearing the same complaints every day, I heard a car engine outside. Assuming it was my husband going to work, I was suddenly pushed out the front door by my mother-in-law and I fell on my butt. She then threw a garbage bag at me and said, "Clean the yard and garden today. I won't let you in until you're done." And she laughed as she slammed the door shut and locked it. I knocked frantically on the door, but there was no sign of it opening. I headed for the back door, but it was locked too. A round trip around the house revealed that all windows were locked as well. I was at the front door, seeing my husband off, so I didn't bother to bring my wallet or smartphone with me. Suddenly, I heard my mother-in-law's laughter from behind. "Still standing there? Get a move on and start cleaning. If you work hard enough, I might be gracious enough to give you a drink." She laughed mockingly at me from the living room window, and when I rushed over, she promptly closed and locked both the window and the door, grinning widely. Without any other choice, I reached for the trash bag and started pulling out the weeds that lay before me in the buzzing heat of the cicadas. After a while, I saw my mother-in-law leave the living room. I moved out of sight from the living room and started thinking about what to do next. If I kept weeding under the scorching sun, I was likely to suffer from heat stroke. I thought about asking someone for help, but everyone around me had either gone to work or was out in the fields. It would be too risky to walk under the sun to the fields, so I decided to hide in the shade until my mother-in-law came to check on me. However, there was no sign of her, and before I knew it, the sun had moved directly overhead. With no shade left, the ruthless summer sun began to scorch my skin. Feeling like a boiled lobster, I knocked on the living room window where my mother-in-law had been watching TV. Opening the window with a look of annoyance, she said, "What's this? You've only done this much in 3 hours?" She glared at the yard. Smirking, my mother-in-law pointed to a large weed near a garden stone and said, "Just pull that one out, and then I'll give you some water." With my throat parched, I squatted down near the stone, trying to ignore the nausea. That was the plan, but it seems my body had reached its limit. Instead of squatting, I fell towards the garden stone. When I put my hand to my throbbing head, I saw blood. I must have hit it on the stone. At that moment, I heard my mother-in-law scream. She rushed over, saw my blood, and recoiled. "We need to go to the hospital. Grab your insurance card and come to the car," she yelled, and hurried back towards the front door. I went into the house from the living room and grabbed my wallet and phone. I called an ambulance on my phone, and knowing they would be there soon gave me some peace. As my consciousness started to blur, I could hardly make it to the car park and collapsed onto the cool floor. The chilly sensation of the tiles made me take a deep breath, but suddenly my arm was yanked. "I'm not letting you die here. We need to get to the hospital now." My mother-in-law said this, yanking my arm and forcing me to walk to the car park. Feeling nauseous and wanting to wait for the ambulance, I tried to communicate this to her, but she wasn't listening. Forcing me into the back seat, she started driving recklessly. If I was going to the hospital myself, I thought I should call again to have them stop the ambulance, and as I clutched my smartphone, I realized that the scenery outside the window was odd. Instead of driving through the city where the hospital is, she was driving toward a remote area densely filled with vegetable and corn fields. Just a few minutes later, she stopped the car and dragged me out. There was nothing but cornfields around, and because it was lunchtime, everyone was away eating and nobody was around. Seeing the evil grin on my mother-in-law's face, I gripped my phone tighter, but she forcibly snatched it away. "Young people these days, calling an ambulance just because they've got a little blood. Can't you think of what the neighbors would say if an ambulance came to our house? In this day and age, there are too many fools calling ambulances for trivial reasons, causing trouble for people who really need help. You, such a foolish daughter-in-law, need some discipline. Stop moping around and walk to the hospital yourself, haha." She put the snatched phone into her own pocket and began to drag me, dizzy and weak, toward the cornfields. The view from the edge showed nothing but lush rice plants, no one in sight. "Stop it!" I pleaded desperately with her, but she just chuckled and said nothing. My mother-in-law violently shoved me. Suddenly there was no ground beneath me, and I was bombarded by pain from all directions. Looking down at me moaning, she laughed with satisfaction, then got back in the car without looking back. "Wait, please, wait!" I screamed as I clutched my throbbing head. But all I heard was the diminishing sound of the engine. My mother-in-law had dumped me in a cornfield and drove off. I closed my eyes to escape the glare of the sun. Without my phone, I couldn't call for help. An ambulance wouldn't come to such a remote place. Even if I wanted to signal for help from a passerby or a car, no one would see me from the road, lowered a step from the rice field. I might die here. That was my last thought before my consciousness faded to black. My eyelids fluttered. After blinking several times, I saw a white ceiling filling my vision. Looking around, I realized from the clean bed and surroundings that I was in a hospital. "Lucas?" I spoke to Lucas, who was lying face down, holding my hand while sitting in the chair next to the bed. Lucas jerked his head up. "Sophia, I'm glad you woke up," he said, tears welling up as he hugged me. He had stayed by my side until I woke up. Lucas explained to my confused self why I was here. I hadn't died, but had fainted from heatstroke. Fortunately, the owner of the cornfield returned early after having lunch and discovered me collapsed there. He quickly called an ambulance for me. I was in a critical condition, so I was transported to a large nearby hospital and narrowly escaped death. When I heard the name of the hospital, I realized it was where my father-in-law was admitted. He seemed to have come to check on me several times out of concern, so I thought vaguely that I should go and thank him later. Then, I remembered about my mother-in-law. Lucas, about her. Lucas took a deep breath, gripped my hand tightly, and began to speak with a serious face. My mother-in-law returned home with an innocent face and tried to send the arriving ambulance away, pretending she knew nothing. The cautious paramedics suspected she might be the prank caller, and were questioning her when the front door suddenly opened. "Mom, what's going on? Why is there an ambulance parked at our house?" The one who rushed in was Lucas. Originally he was off today, but he had to go to work due to an unavoidable task, and came home as scheduled in the afternoon. The paramedic explained that they had received a call about a case of heatstroke with bleeding from the head and came to this house, but since the crucial person who reported wasn't there, they were talking to my mother-in-law. Lucas, taken aback by the serious manner of the explanation, immediately called me from there. Just then, my mother-in-law held Lucas's arm, breaking into a cold sweat, and laughed. I remembered, shopping. Sophia said she was going to do the lunch shopping. That's why she'll be back soon, right? Not only Lucas was suspicious of her behavior. "Sir, please call your wife." "Didn't you hear? She'll be back soon." As soon as the paramedic said this, my mother-in-law lunged at the man from the ambulance crew. Meanwhile, Lucas dialed my cell phone. The ringtone of my cell phone could be heard from my mother-in-law. Oh, this is my ringtone?" I asked Sophia and set the same sound. It's such a coincidence that I got a call at this timing. "Mom, show me your cell phone." Lucas confronted my mother-in-law who was rambling on in a fast pace. Lucas, exasperated by the feigning ignorance of my mother-in-law, forcibly put his hand into her pocket. And, glaring when my cell phone came out of her pocket. My mother-in-law, who let out a small scream, ran upstairs as if escaping from Lucas. He chased her immediately, and she seemed to have slipped just before reaching the top of the stairs. She fell down the stairs, and her legs were obviously twisted in a way they shouldn't be. In the end, my mother-in-law was sobbing from the pain in her leg and had no time to talk about me. The paramedic said they would contact the police and search, and Lucas agreed readily. For now, they couldn't leave my mother-in-law as she was, so they had to take her to the hospital in the car. And at the hospital they arrived at, Lucas said he had found me by chance being brought in. "If I hadn't been at the hospital, they were planning to call me after you woke up and heard what happened. But I'm glad I found you, even if it was a coincidence." Lucas left my mother-in-law to the doctor and was with me all the time. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I never thought my mom would go this far. She's not a violent person, even if she's sarcastic. I'm really sorry for putting you in danger. I'm glad you're alive." Saying this, Lucas apologized to me, shedding big tears. Fortunately, my head wound was not serious, and the bleeding seemed to have stopped by the time I was brought to the hospital. Rather, the heat stroke caused more damage, and I still had an 4 in my arm. But it's almost over, and as long as I don't feel dizzy afterwards, I can go home. When I think about going back to that house, I feel depressed. Then I suddenly wondered what had happened to my mother-in-law since she came to the hospital. Lucas, you didn't do anything wrong. But I can't live together anymore. So, what happened to her? I asked while stroking Lucas's crying back. Lucas said a little awkwardly. Actually, she's in the next room. Apparently, due to the availability of beds, my mother-in-law is next door now. I can feel my heart pounding and my pulse quickening. If they had found me later, I might not be here now. Thinking about it made my body shake with fear and anger. Mom broke both her legs and will have to be hospitalized for a while. I guess it's karma, Lucas said with a stern look. I couldn't just back down quietly and said, Lucas, I'm going to see my mother-in-law now. And got out of the bed. There was no dizziness, and I could walk normally, so I went to the next room with Lucas. Since my mother-in-law was the only one in the next room, I walked straight to the back of the room, stood by my mother-in-law's bed, and said, You look terrible. Do you understand a little how I felt when I wanted to call an ambulance? When my mother-in-law saw me, she snapped. You're as fit as a fiddle. I bet it was just a pretense of illness. And didn't even try to meet my gaze. Unable to contain my anger, I firmly stated. After that, someone immediately called for an ambulance, which is why I'm still standing here. If it weren't for that, I might not be here right now. Meeting you now made me realize that you have no trace of remorse for what you did. I will sue you. Be prepared for that. My mother-in-law was yelling things like, You're just a lousy daughter-in-law. Or, I won't forgive you for suing me. But I ignored her and left the hospital room. The next day, I was discharged. Just when I received a call from the new apartment management company I had applied to, I went for a viewing and decided to move in on the same day. Moving in was quick, and since we could move in right away, my husband Lucas immediately hired a lawyer to prepare for suing my mother-in-law. When we went to my mother-in-law's hospital room with the lawyer, she had a blank expression at first, but gradually turned red and started yelling. I really can't understand what you're thinking. Is it wrong for a young person like you to clean the garden? It's your own fault for pushing yourself and ending up with heat stroke. To be honest, it'll be tough to sue you for what happened until Sophia collapsed, as there's no evidence. But there's a record that Sophia called an ambulance on her phone. We saw that you had Sophia's phone after that time, and both me and the paramedics saw it. Besides, there are traces of Sophia's blood in your car. So, we plan to use these points to make a case against you. My mother-in-law was shocked by Lucas's cold words, and she kept crying and insulting me. You can say whatever you want, but be prepared that insulting or defamation charges can lead to heavy compensation. When my voice reached her, my mother-in-law slumped her shoulders and continued crying. We left the rest to the lawyer and moved to the new apartment. We enjoyed a peaceful life together. And about 3 months later, my mother-in-law called. No one had brought her a phone while she was in the hospital, so she hadn't been able to make any calls. As a result, I had completely forgotten to block her calls. Seeing Lucas nod next to me, I nervously answered the call. Why is nobody at home? This is your home, right? Come back with my son. Both my husband and I have become unable to walk, so we need someone to take care of us. It's only natural for a daughter-in-law to take care of her in-laws, even someone as dumb as you should understand that, right? Just as Lucas's face turned red and he was about to shout, we heard my mother-in-law's laughter from the other end of the line. Oh, and one more thing. Return the money I lent you right away. Honestly, you borrow money from your parents and call it compensation. Stupid women like you have no idea what you're thinking. I'll have to give you proper education for your rotten way of thinking. Even after taking a few seconds to process my mother-in-law's words, I couldn't understand what she was saying. Listening to my mother-in-law's continued words, it seems she thinks the compensation she paid me was the money she lent me. I was at a loss for what to do, and Lucas clenched his phone tightly. The one with a rotten mind and way of thinking is you, Mom. We won't have anything to do with you from now on. Don't ever come back or try to meet us again. Look up the meaning of compensation in the dictionary. Stay away from us for good." Following Lucas's loud shouting, I shouted just as loudly. Then, we hung up the phone and quickly blocked her calls. Lucas even deleted my mother-in-law's contact information. Even though we had treated it as a settlement after receiving the compensation, I decided to consult the police about my mother-in-law's situation again. It turned out she was already being sued by the owner of the cornfield, due to my fall in the cornfield leading to a loss of harvest. Moreover, when I fell, I collided with the water pump in the field, causing it to malfunction, making it impossible to add or drain water. As a result, the condition of the corn deteriorated rapidly, and the owner was furious. Since my mother-in-law had paid me the compensation, she had very little savings left, and her situation became dire. And I finally understood why my mother-in-law wanted money back, but it was no longer my concern. I brought a gift basket and apologized to the owner of the cornfield for my fall, but he kindly laughed and said that it was the person who pushed me who was at fault. In the end, my mother-in-law took on debt to pay the settlement to the owner of the cornfield and is now working desperately to repay it. Actually, my mother-in-law had been asked for a divorce by my father-in-law and was driven out of their house. In her eyes, I was still the thief who stole her beloved son. And she couldn't stand it when she realized I had a good relationship with my father-in-law. That's why she planned to dominate me while my father-in-law was in the hospital to establish her position. However, it backfired, and she ended up almost killing me. My father-in-law left behind some inheritance after dividing the property and sold the house before moving away. My mother-in-law lost her home and has been living in a pitiful state every day. She is still searching for my father-in-law, but she won't find him, because he now lives with us. My father-in-law is with us until he gets a new house after selling the previous one. Of course, we haven't informed my mother-in-law about it. My father-in-law was safely discharged from the hospital, and now his condition has improved to the point where he can go for daily walks as part of his physical therapy. While his everyday movements have become a bit slower, he doesn't require full-time care, so we opted to watch over him from nearby. I still maintain a good relationship with my father-in-law, and on days off, we even go on trips and have meals together. My name is Helen, and I'm 68 years old. About 6 months ago, my only son, who is now 35, got married. After losing my husband, I raised him single-handedly, and now I finally feel a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. Honestly, I feel relieved to have passed the baton to his wife. Having decided to take it easy, I quit my job 3 months ago, so now I'm living on my pension. You can't do that, Helen. Many people age rapidly once they retire. The woman who took over the management of my lunch spot, Mary, says this as she nibbles on the homemade cookies she brought along. She's slightly older than my son, practically of an age to be my daughter, and she's been working at my shop since her high school days and is a veteran with over 20 years of experience. I'll take over the shop if you're going to close it, Mary said, so I happily left it in her hands. It was a shop beloved by the locals for its cheap and tasty homemade-style lunch, and I would have been sad to close it. I knew she would perfectly continue the flavors. Helen, you're not getting off so easily. Please help me think of a new menu for the fall, she said, spreading a thick recipe notebook on the table. Truthfully, I'm glad to be relied upon. Is your son getting along well in his married life? Since we've known each other for 2 decades, she naturally knows my son. I had hoped the two of them would get together, but unfortunately, that didn't happen. Well, I don't want to be a meddlesome mother-in-law, so I'm mostly hands-off. I handed over the 2-bedroom apartment where my son and I had lived to my son and his wife, and now I'm living alone in a studio apartment. My son's wife, Emily, is 32, 3 years younger than my son. They met through a mutual acquaintance and started dating. Not long after our first meeting, Emily mentioned, "This apartment is owned by you, isn't it, Helen? Isn't it a bit cramped for 3 people?" "Yes, it's quite old. Maybe you could rent an apartment nearby," I suggested. "But wouldn't it be financially secure for you to live alone and save on rent?" Emily countered. I married late, and my husband was 10 years older, so we thought we wouldn't have children. My husband was always a bachelor at heart, and the apartment we bought before marriage was just right for 2 people. We lived comfortably together and unexpectedly had a son. We were amazed at how adorable our child was. My husband, thinking about providing for our son, even in his 60s and 70s, was lost in a traffic accident. It happened just when our son was entering junior high school. My husband had thought ahead and had life insurance. Since the accident was entirely not his fault, we received a considerable amount of money, including damages. Considering that I had to live with my son from now on, I decided to start a small lunch shop, leveraging my best skill, cooking. The apartment filled with memories of my late husband is indeed, as Emily said, financially secure for me to rent a studio than for them to rent a whole apartment. After Emily left, I told my son. She's quite straightforward. Then my son says, yeah, she is. I'm not really good at reading between the lines, so I like that about her. My son said with a smile. If he's happy with her, I have no objections. Even though the couple cleverly landed a rent-free place, my son offered to pay for my new apartment's rent and help with the move in full. He told me, thank you. But don't worry about me. I'm sure you two will have plenty of things you need too. I'll ask you for help with moving, though. Despite what I said, I still felt a lingering unease after meeting Emily, whom I had just met that day. One day, I got a call from my son. Hey, Mom. Want to come over for dinner sometime soon? My son and his wife had invited me. Although I was delighted with the invitation, the discussion that followed left me wringing my hands. Actually, Emily's cooking is. According to my son, who seemed to struggle to get the words out, Emily's cooking is apparently downright unpalatable. Apparently, she doesn't really enjoy cooking. She often resorts to deli food from the supermarket or frozen meals, which, according to my son, is much better than the dishes she makes. At first, my son tried to make various suggestions, like, I want to eat this, it would be better if you did this. And, should I cook? But every time, Emily would become extremely grumpy. We used to always have cereal and fruits for breakfast, right? Emily wants energy bars. When I said I wanted to eat fruits for breakfast, she got upset. When I then said, at least let's have cereal, she got even more upset, and the next morning, she silently served Creole without milk. I was at a loss for words hearing my son's lament. Dietary habits and preferences can be tricky. It might be one of the first obstacles a newly married couple encounters. Either way, since my son brought this up, it left me with a headache. So, when you come over for dinner, could you subtly teach Emily about cooking? I wasn't thrilled about the proposal. One evening, I was invited over to my son and his wife's place. Seeing my son after several months, I was shocked. He had lost a considerable amount of weight. The situation might be more serious than I thought. Being married for just over half a year, my son must have tried his best to improve their eating habits. His call to me was a distress signal. Their apartment had been remodeled since I lived there, and it felt oddly different. Welcome, my mother-in-law. Emily greeted me cheerfully. When I handed her the cherries I had brought as a gift, she was delighted and told me, please sit and wait. I'll prepare the meal right away. She gave off the impression of a perfect wife. When I saw the dinner menu laid out on the table, I broke into a cold sweat. Fish fries, which are from supermarket deli food. Steaks seemed homemade, but slightly undercooked. Salad from a supermarket. Soup with onion and bacon. Pickles from a supermarket deli. I couldn't understand how, when inviting your mother-in-law over for dinner, the majority of the food could be supermarket deli items. To begin with, this menu is too heavy for a person nearing their 70s. The fish fries, if warmed in an oven with a baking sheet, would come out crispy. But she had heated it in the microwave, so it was soggy. The steaks were predictably undercooked in the center, and the soup had so much granulated soup stock that it was overpoweringly salty. I gently offered advice like, if you do it this way, it will be much tastier. But she just became more upset. You might want to grill the steaks a bit more. Raw meat could potentially cause food poisoning. When I made that comment, Emily quickly gathered up the dishes as if to snatch them away and reheated the steaks over high heat. She burnt them black and slammed the plate back down as if to say, you can't complain now, can you? Oh, would you like some of my pickling jars and the syrup? I said, thinking I was being helpful, but it seemed to touch a nerve with her. I bought these pickles especially for your son because I know he loves them. I can't stand them and I don't even want to touch them. And you're asking me to take care for the stinky pickling syrup every day? I guess making pickles might be a tough task for someone who doesn't like them. And you used to feed him packed lunches all the time, didn't you? It's no different from supermarket food, is it? The truth seemed to be getting sidetracked. Yes, I had fed him lunches from the store I ran, but it was no different from my homemade cooking. They weren't supermarket lunches, they were homemade lunches from the store my mother ran herself. I made sure to clarify that, didn't I? My son had to explain hastily. So that's how it is, you're siding with your mother. Fine then. If you don't want to eat, don't. With a shout, she stormed off to the bedroom, leaving my son and I to sigh and stare at the untouched food on the table. I'm sorry. I upset Emily. When I apologized, my son said, Am I being too picky? But it's hard when it's every day. I'm really at my limit. He said this with a face half covered in tears. What should I have done? At any rate, it didn't look like my son's eating habits were going to improve. It was worrying, but I was unsure how much I should intervene. A few days later, Emily unexpectedly visited my apartment. I'm sorry about the other day. I was relieved to hear her apology, as I had thought she thoroughly disliked me. I served some of my best tea and biscuits, hoping to build rapport with my daughter-in-law. So, I hear you're wealthy, Helen. Emily's comment took me by surprise. I don't know what she heard from my son, but it's true that I have savings. It's money left by my late husband and what I've been saving bit by bit from running the lunch store. I want to try for a baby. Can you help us out a bit, Helen? She was 32. I understand her feelings well, as it's a critical age for women. I couldn't refuse when she asked for help. I took out $5,000 from my savings and handed it to her. I know it's tough, but hang in there as a couple. I was 33 when I had my son, so I understand how you feel. When I said this, Emily grumbled. Please don't pressure me just because you gave me money. She said that to me. I didn't quite understand why she was upset. I've heard it's hard for mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law to get along, and it seems it's really true. I'm active on social media, and a lot of people are criticizing you, you know. Emily showed me her phone's screen. This probably happened during our dinner conversation the other day. There were numerous comments supporting her while vilifying me with foul language. I was shocked, but from a glance at the posts, I could tell that Emily had twisted the situation to make herself out as the victim. Mother and daughter-in-law not getting along, huh? I don't think it should be like that, but I'm starting to lose confidence that Emily and I can get along in the future. After a while, I called my son to talk about Emily's fertility treatments, and his reaction was surprising. I don't think she's doing anything like that. She doesn't like kids, and it's not like I'm insisting on having them. I had given her money because she said she needed it for fertility treatments. My son was very surprised to hear this. My son cleared up her misunderstanding and explained to her that I used the money my husband left me to start a small lunch shop, which had become quite popular locally. Emily seemed interested when she heard this and kept asking about my savings. Oh wow, she is so rich! Despite his confusion, my son responded. Well, maybe she has about $1 million? I'm sorry, I think I said something I shouldn't have. I'll check up on the fertility treatment thing, he said, and hung up. I felt uneasy as days passed without hearing back from him. Then another shocking thing happened. I received a charge on my credit card that I didn't recognize. I don't usually use my card. So I hurriedly checked. I found that my card was missing from my wallet. If I had lost my wallet, that would be one thing, but it's hard to believe that a card I rarely use would just fall out of it. What confirmed my suspicions even more was that the items purchased with that card were high-end branded bags and wallets. Emily must have secretly taken the card from my wallet the last time she visited. Not only did she deceive me into giving her $5,000 under the pretense of fertility treatments, but she also stole my card. This is a bigger problem than just her terrible cooking. I contacted the credit card company to freeze the card. Although family members who misuse a card are not usually held accountable, I couldn't let her keep spending my money. Did knowing I had savings blind her to reason? Originally, she probably wasn't after my property. I was kind of sad, but I couldn't just stay quiet. I was fed up with her cooking, so I reached out to my son in advance. Why don't you try my homemade cooking once in a while? When I suggested this, my son seemed more than happy. Emily might be upset again, but is that okay? When I asked him, he replied in a resigned tone. Yeah, I'm kinda at my limit too. I'm ready for whatever happens. The day, I brought all the ingredients to my son's apartment that day and prepared the meal in the kitchen I once knew so well. Emily stayed in the bedroom and didn't help me at all. She was probably writing nasty comments about me on social media again. Ah, delicious. This is it. You would understand if you tried it. My son was delighted to eat my cooking, so much so that one might think he was overdoing it. After all, I had only cooked his favorite dishes. However, after taking a sip of my soup, Emily frowned. Isn't this soup a bit bland? That's because you add too much granulated stock. The problem isn't the stock itself, but rather the quantity. I replied with a stern tone. Predictably, she stubbornly retorted. But it tastes better with more. Even supermarket ready-made food tastes different with a bit of extra effort. It's a lifesaver for busy homemakers. I've been selling boxed lunches for busy people all my life. But you're not working, Emily, so you have plenty of time to cook, don't you? I asked. Caught off guard, she fell silent for a moment, then snapped. I can't make these bland, old people's meals. She spat out her words with contempt. Even my son seemed to lose his temper at this. Or rather, he'd probably been fed up for quite a while. If you say you can't make it, then fine. You probably didn't even want to cook in the first place, did you? This grilled fish, the stuffed bell peppers, the soup, the pickles. They all taste 100 times better than your cooking. Emily, getting an earful from my son, angrily stood up and shouted. Oh, I can't take it anymore. If I knew you were such a mama's boy, I wouldn't have married you. Does a son praising his mother's cooking make him a mama's boy? I stopped Emily as she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the room. Wait a minute. That bag, it's the new product from that brand, isn't it? She flinched for a moment, then replied. Huh? Yes, what about it? She seemed determined to play innocent. You see, I got a bill for a bag from that brand, purchased with my card. I had no idea, so I thought it was strange. I confronted her directly, but she didn't flinch. Huh? Helen, maybe you forgot about your own shopping? It happens when you get older. Ignoring my point, she tried to blame it on my cognitive abilities. My son, who had been silent without understanding the situation, interjected. Hey, didn't you buy a wallet along with that bag? Yes, the charge from the credit company included both the bag and the wallet. It came to a total of $3,000. Hey, why does the bill for your shopping go to my mom? She stole my card from my purse. Upon my revelation, my son slumped his shoulders in dismay. You stole her card? What were you thinking? That's criminal behavior, even if we're family. Even as she was berated by my son, she showed no remorse and shrugged. Oh, come on, I didn't steal it. I just borrowed it. Helen has enough with her pension, right? Money isn't something you can take with you when you die, so it's better to spend it. Her words were no excuse at all, but she didn't seem to think she'd done anything wrong. So, you even lied about wanting to have a baby to squeeze money out of my mom? I wasn't lying. I really did intend to. But it seemed like such a big deal. And it seemed like it would be tough on you too, so I thought you might not want to. Her words were as if she had given up thinking about my son's sake. I wasn't informed of anything. It seemed my son had also realized that talking with her was futile. I didn't care whether my son and Emily had children. As long as my son could live happily with Emily, that would be enough. But it seemed that was an impossible wish. It may be enough for me to live on my pension. Indeed, I do have savings. As I began, Emily's eyes brightened as if she thought her point had been proven. Huh? I told you so, didn't I? I overrode Emily's attempt to interrupt. That money isn't for me. It's for my son and his family. I don't recognize you as family. It's not your money to spend. Her face turned from red to blue, then she retorted. What are you talking about? I'm your son's wife, aren't I? Aren't we family? And she pouted. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to say that. My son slowly began to speak. I don't want to be married to you anymore. Let's get a divorce. At the moment she heard these words, she lost her temper and started screaming. Are you out of your mind? Why are we suddenly talking about divorce? This isn't sudden. I've been thinking about it for months. It's not your fault you're not good at cooking. But you never tried to make an effort, did you? My son must have been really frustrated with his wife's cooking, but you can't get divorced just because someone isn't a good cook. Do you have any evidence that I haven't made any effort? She argued like a school kid. Finally, I couldn't stay quiet any longer. Look, cooking is about considering the person who's going to eat it. It's not about being good or bad at it. There are recipes that anyone can follow to cook a dish. You never even asked me once what your husband's favorite meal is, did you? Also, maybe being bad at cooking isn't a reason for divorce, but the fact that you lied to me to extort money, and that you stole cards to go shopping, are crimes, right? Those are valid reasons for divorce. If my son wants a divorce, I will support him. What's the matter with you two? Like mother, like son. His wife burst into a rage and started throwing around unpleasant words, but my son coldly pushed her away saying, I don't want to dislike you any more than I already do. Can you please be quiet? My son coldly shut her down, and then it finally went quiet. If you don't want a divorce, go ahead and seek mediation or take it to court. I don't think you'll win though. If you agree to part ways amicably, I'll give you that designer handbag and wallet. I'll repay the money my mom lost due to your fertility treatment scam as well. My son seemed determined. I didn't really need him to repay me, but I decided to keep silent about it. What? A scam? How awful that sounds. You think you can pay me off with just this? You must be joking. She tried to argue further. All right. In that case, I'm going to charge everything to you. Wait for it. Upon hearing my son's parting words, it seemed that she finally realized her disadvantage. After a while, Emily, who took over my shop, came by with her recipe notebook. She wanted to consult about the Christmas menu. When I told her about the struggle with my daughter-in-law, she said sympathetically, That must have been tough. My son's divorce was finalized, and his ex-wife packed her belongings and left. In the end, I returned to my old apartment and once again began living with my son. The acquaintance who introduced my former daughter-in-law, perhaps feeling guilty, informed my son about her subsequent life. The fact that she couldn't cook at all, her criminal behavior and constant verbal abuse towards me, were becoming well known, and she seemed to have lost all her friends. Well, not just this time, but I feel, rather late in the game, that her character was problematic to begin with. It seems she's actively trying to get remarried, but maybe her gold-digging intentions are too transparent, as she can't seem to make any romantic connections. I can only hope there won't be any more victims like us. But it might be tough for a daughter-in-law if the mother-in-law is a good cook. Food habits can be very different depending on the region. It's a tricky issue, isn't it? Emily made a poignant remark. That's true. If you were my daughter-in-law, things wouldn't have turned out like this. After all, you can perfectly replicate my cooking. When I casually said that, she blushed and replied, Please stop. Don't tease a nearly 40-year-old single woman like that. My son, who was drinking coffee next to us, said, Mary is not an old lady. You were actually my crush when I was in high school. I thought you were awesome for being beautiful and a great cook. And turned red, creating a strange atmosphere. What? You should have told me that at the time. Well, you treated me like a kid since I was younger and in high school. Watching the two of them joking around, I started to think, could this possibly lead to something more? If these three of us could become a family, it would surely work out well. If that's the case, we'd need a bigger kitchen. While thinking about this, I couldn't help but smile. To capture a man's heart, you start with his stomach. Maybe that old saying has some truth to it. They look like the very picture of happiness, don't they? I guess if we had kids, we might have had a family like that too. Daniel says, flashing a warm smile. His grin is soft, as though he's looking at something dearly beloved. At first glance, anyone might think Daniel, with that expression, is a gentle soul. But the reality is quite different. A small boy, surrounded by kind-looking parents, frolicking with joy. It's a shame for the kid, but I'm about to shatter their happiness. And I'm going to do it in the most terrible way. But all of this, every last bit, is Daniel's fault. If there's any blame, it should fall on Daniel, who betrayed me so cruelly. Their misery is all because of Daniel. My name is Betty Smith, a 43-year-old homemaker. I live with my husband, Daniel. I met Daniel through a friend. At the time, I wasn't particularly interested in romance, but Daniel proactively asked me out on dates. Gradually, I started to have feelings for Daniel and we started dating, which led to our marriage. We never had kids. It wasn't a fertility issue or anything. Daniel was always busy with work and was frequently away from home from the start of our marriage. With his frequent business trips and him being gone for days, we just didn't have much time to spend as a couple. Sure, if we had kids, we could have experienced the happiness that comes with an expanded family. But we were perfectly happy with just the two of us. Even without children, being able to live with the person I love most. It was more than enough to make me happy. I believe Daniel felt the same. But at the same time, I had my doubts. I didn't want to suspect Daniel, but he was indeed always busy. Another business trip? This is the third one this month, right? And this time you're going to be gone for a week? That day, when Daniel returned from work, he told me he had another business trip scheduled. From what I could gather, he had to travel far this time, requiring a flight, and it seemed he wouldn't be able to return for about a week. This was already his third trip this month. Sure, work can be busy, but there are limits. What's more, he's been working overtime daily, to the point where we, as a married couple, barely have the chance to see each other. Daniel, it's really odd that you're this busy. Isn't your company one of those infamous black companies? Maybe you should consider a job change. We could manage our finances for a month or two. I'm worried your health might give in at this rate. Not only daily overtime, but also frequent business trips. Clearly, Daniel's company is not normal. At this rate, Daniel might break down. As his wife, I feel it's my duty to do something about this. With this feeling, I tried to persuade Daniel. No, I'm okay. Work is tough, sure, but it's also rewarding. I'm sorry for being away so much, it must have been lonely. But, working is important for our life together, Betty. Daniel replied with a troubled smile. Indeed, having a job is essential for making a living. But does that mean there has to be a reason to push ourselves this hard? I started to question Daniel's words and the company he works for. Am I wrong? Is Daniel's way of thinking just common? Do I really have to continue my current job to support our household? In the end, no matter how much I try to persuade him, Daniel has no intention of changing jobs, so nothing changes and we continue to live our lives. As usual, our intimacy as a couple is quite minimal. I'm happy if we sleep in the same bed once a week. It's been this way since we got married. I'm sure the reason why we don't have children is because of that. In the midst of this, Daniel happened to have a day off, so we traveled a bit and came to a shopping mall in the neighboring town. Due to the holiday, there were many families, and every time I saw children happily holding their parents' hands, I couldn't help but sigh, wishing we could be like that too. Seeing me like this, Daniel made a face. Stop sighing, it's our day off. Why don't we go eat instead? Looking at the time, it was indeed lunchtime. We decided to go to a nearby diner after discussing it. As it was lunchtime on a holiday, there were many people. Sure enough, there were many families inside. A child, excited looking at the kids' menu. A child smiling, being fed a hamburger by a woman who seemed to be his mother. Every time I saw such happy family scenes, I couldn't help but think about why we don't have children, and all the unpleasant thoughts came to mind. I wondered if Daniel was thinking the same, as he quietly muttered while watching the families. Kids are cute and wonderful. I wonder what kind of child we would have had. Those words hit me hard. I might be taking it too pessimistically, but it felt like a jab at me for not being able to have children. I wanted children too. I wanted to give birth to a child with Daniel and build a happy family. All of this is because Daniel's job is too demanding. If he had considered changing his job earlier, creating even a little time for us, we might have become a happy family like those people. With those thoughts, I sighed at my own negative thinking. It's not Daniel's fault. Daniel is just working hard for us to live happily. Despite all that, look at what I'm thinking. Maybe I was so fed up with my own thoughts that the food brought to us didn't taste good. I felt like Daniel was looking at me with a displeased face. In the end, I couldn't even enjoy the rare outing with Daniel that day. Since that time, my relationship with Daniel became strained. There was something I felt towards our child, and unconsciously I started to distance myself from Daniel, but I had a feeling that Daniel was also somewhat avoiding me. I knew this couldn't continue, but I had no idea what to do. Because I didn't understand why things had turned out this way. Even when I tried to think it through on my own, I couldn't find an answer, so I decided to consult a friend who I'd known since my school days about the situation. My friend listened to my story sincerely. And, empathizing with my words, they reassured me. "Betty, you're doing your best." But even so, I didn't feel any better. Seeing me like this, my friend looked somewhat puzzled, prefaced their words with, "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but..." and then told me something. That revelation left me feeling dizzy. I couldn't believe it. If that was true, then Daniel. From the day I talked with my friend, I started to distance myself from Daniel. My friend's words kept echoing in my mind. A few days later, during the day, I was walking through the residential neighborhood with Daniel. Suddenly, I said, "I want to go for a walk." And though Daniel looked surprised, I was relieved that he agreed to join me. We passed by a certain house. We could see the yard of the house. There, a happy family was having a barbecue. A little boy was playing cheerfully, surrounded by a man and woman who looked like his parents. Seeing this scene, Daniel murmured, "That's like a picture-perfect family. Maybe if we had a child, we could have been a family like that." Towards the joyful family, Daniel cast a loving gaze. At first glance, one might perceive Daniel as a kind person. But the reality is different. Daniel and this family are irreversibly connected. That happy scene is undeniable proof of Daniel's cruel betrayal. That's why I had brought him near this house today. I watched Daniel to see if he showed any remorse, but it seemed he had none. If so, then no one would blame me for dragging him through hell. The child is innocent, but all of this is Daniel's fault. If there's someone to resent, it's Daniel. I made up my mind to punish the traitors. Yes, that may be so. But because of you, they're going to be miserable, I say, gazing at the family playing happily in the distance. At my words, Daniel tilted his head as if to say, "What are you talking about?" and muttered, "Huh?" He seems to be playing dumb, even at this point. What the hell is going on? They and I have nothing to do with each other, right? Sure, I must look like a weirdo for bringing this up out of the blue. But I don't intend to send innocent people to hell. It's because there's a connection that they're sent to hell. There was a tremor in Daniel's voice, or so it seemed to me. From Daniel's point of view, he wouldn't have expected me to say such a thing all of a sudden. Because there's no way his actions so far have been exposed. I was truly underestimated. Well, who knows? Let's just go home for today. We have no more business here, I said, taking Daniel's hand and starting our way home. Daniel, looking uneasy at my behavior, kept saying things like, "What the hell is going on?" and "Why won't you talk to me?" But I didn't answer. The old me would have consulted with Daniel right away if I had a problem. Daniel was a dependable husband to that extent. Well, now I realize that was just to keep up the appearances of being a married couple. When I got home, I didn't talk much, just had some dinner and then shut myself in my room. Daniel, looking anxious the entire time, kept glancing at me, but I pretended not to notice. Late that night, I quietly left the house. Daniel was sound asleep, so he probably didn't notice me going out. I slipped an envelope into a mailbox at a certain house. That envelope was my trump card. I'm sure the owner of this house will be surprised when they see the trump card I've prepared the next morning. All of this is the fault of the traitor. I've just decided to punish the one who betrayed me. If there had been no betrayal, none of this would have happened. Happiness wouldn't have been destroyed. With each step I take, I feel a tightening in my chest as I realize I've come too far to turn back. I can't pretend none of this happened. I can't go back. The next morning, Daniel and I were having breakfast together. It was Sunday, but Daniel had plans to be out of the house for work as usual. Just then, the doorbell rang. Who could it be, this early in the morning? Daniel, suspicious, got up from his seat to check the doorbell monitor. Then, the sight that spread before him made Daniel exclaim. "Why?" The people on the screen were the couple from the house we had visited the day before. A man, presumably the husband, his face red, spoke through the intercom. "Sorry for disturbing you so early in the morning. We have something to discuss, could we come in?" Watching the man, the woman turned pale, exclaiming, "Oh, hold on, please stop. Let's go home. We can't trouble these people." Apparently, it was the man's decision to come to our house, and the woman seemed to have followed him, trying to stop him somehow. "Why are they here? What's going on?" Why had they come to our house? In Daniel's mind, it seemed like their visit to our house was not a good thing. While nodding in agreement, I opened the front door. "You saw that envelope, didn't you? Please come in. Let's talk face to face." As I said that envelope, the man's eyes widened. Yes, it was their house that I had slipped the envelope into late at night. When I invited the two of them into our house, Daniel turned ashen as if flustered. Ignoring Daniel, I made the couple sit down and served them tea. Daniel, who could not digest the situation, kept saying, "Why?" The woman, who was eager to go home. And the man, looking at both of them alternately, his eyes full of determination. The cast was now properly gathered here. It was time for the revelation. "You came here because you saw this picture, didn't you?" I said, laying out the contents of the envelope I had taken out of the cupboard onto the table. The inside of the envelope were the same as what I had put into their mailbox last night. There were a lot of pictures. In each picture, Daniel and the woman were walking arm in arm in the city at night, looking very friendly. Yes, they were having an affair. The reason I knew this was because one day, when I was talking to a friend, she told me, "I saw Daniel walking arm in arm with a woman in the city at night." At first, I couldn't believe what she said. That night, while Daniel was in the bath, I checked his smartphone that he had left in the living room. His password was so careless that even I could easily see what was inside. There were text exchanges with a certain woman. It seems that the two of them have known each other since their student days and apparently were close even before I started dating him. They seem to have drifted apart upon starting their careers, but they happened to reunite at a class reunion and apparently started dating from there. In other words, while he was in a relationship and even married to me, he was fooling around with another woman. This is unforgivable. With this thought, I hired a private investigator to track their movements. Then, the evidence started piling up. Moreover, she had a child. By calculating backwards from the time the child was born, it was discovered that the likely conception period coincided with a week-long trip the two had taken. All this while, I had believed Daniel's absences were due to his busy work schedule. But that was a lie. It seemed he was simply spending time with her, coming home late and frequently going on business trips. She, like Daniel, probably used the excuse of being busy with work to spend time with him, all to avoid arousing suspicion from her husband. This means, the child Daniel once looked upon so affectionately was his and her child. When I explained all this in my own words, the man's face turned beet red and he grabbed the woman by the collar. "It's not like that. Everything she's saying is a lie. That child is yours, there's no doubt. The woman shouted out in desperation. But the presence of the photographs made it clear, at least the infidelity was a fact. The man's anger did not easily dissipate. I'm divorcing you. Be prepared, the man declared loudly. The woman was sobbing, pleading. Wait. And it's not like that. And I let out a sigh, wondering what she thought was wrong. As I watched their dispute, I casually glanced at Daniel and noticed him breaking out in cold sweat, perhaps feeling apprehensive about the upcoming events. Of course, it wasn't just her who was at fault for the affair. Daniel too needed to face his consequences. It seemed the man was somewhat satisfied with demanding a divorce. His face still held the traces of anger, but he said nothing more and took his seat. It was as if he was passing the baton to me. Of course, Daniel, you will face appropriate consequences too, okay? Your actions are a clear act of betrayal. And you've been fooling me for years, I said, smiling slyly. When I first discovered Daniel's betrayal, I struggled to accept the reality and prayed again and again that it was just a dream, but once things started to progress, I didn't feel that way anymore, and all I could think about was sending Daniel straight to hell. My words made Daniel's face turn pale and he fell to his knees. Please, forgive me. I admit that I was involved with her, but it's you that I truly love. That's why even when she had a child, I didn't divorce you, and I wanted us to stay together as a couple. I would have been fine just being with you, even if we didn't have a child. Suddenly, Daniel started saying things that were all too convenient. At that, Daniel's words made a woman's face turn beet red as she lunged at him, exclaiming, "What's that supposed to mean?" Ignoring her, Daniel continued. It was all just a fling with her. I was just under a spell. The only one I truly love is you, Betty. I don't care about the kid or her. As long as I'm with you, that's all that matters. Normally, being told by your loved one that you're all they need would be something to rejoice about. But I couldn't believe Daniel's words anymore. After all, there was a time when Daniel undoubtedly looked at that boy with love. Because he clearly felt affection for that child. You say you don't care about the kid, but that's a lie. You've been talking about having children for a while now. You've always wanted a child, haven't you? You wouldn't make a face like that if you didn't want a child. You wouldn't say something like, "We're a picture-perfect family." For Daniel, having a child might symbolize happiness. But there's no child between us. Because Daniel has been prioritizing his time with his mistress over me for a long time. I really don't care about the kid. I don't care about her either. All I need is you. Please, believe me. No matter what I say, Daniel keeps desperately denying it. He really doesn't want to divorce. If we divorce, it will leave a mark on his record, and if his parents-in-law find out, they'll definitely be furious. They hate dishonesty, so if this comes out, they'll surely give Daniel a good talking to. They might even disown him. It's impossible, I can't believe you. Who's been betraying me for years, having an affair behind my back? Who's been disregarding my trust, my feelings? And yet, you didn't want to have a child with me, but you had a child with your mistress without a second thought. There's no way I could believe you after all that. Let's divorce. I can't continue as a married couple with you anymore. I told him clearly. At my words, Daniel looked desperate. If it had been the old me, it would have taken a lot of courage to even mention the word divorce. Because I loved Daniel that much. Despite knowing that, Daniel cruelly betrayed me. That crime shouldn't be forgiven so easily. On top of that, Daniel is trying to neglect even the child who undoubtedly carries his blood. If Daniel hadn't acted so irresponsibly, none of this would have happened. But to even abandon his child to protect himself is unthinkable. Daniel has to take the minimum responsibility as an adult. That's why I can't forgive Daniel here. Rather, I need to punish him and make him face his sins. And make sure he never disregards people's feelings again. The woman he cheated with, her face red with anger, was sobbing uncontrollably. Daniel, shaking off the woman's arm, threw himself at my feet in desperation. Desperately trying to hold on to me, he clung to my feet. Sighing heavily at the sight, I saw Daniel's shoulders shake. But even seeing him like that, I didn't feel the slightest inclination to forgive Daniel. Afterwards, we decided to divorce. Daniel was very reluctant, and we even had to go through divorce mediation. We had plenty of evidence of the affair, so the divorce was granted on the grounds of Daniel's responsibility. Then, I demanded property division from Daniel. Of course, Daniel's parents-in-law heard about the situation, and they were furious. They wouldn't even let him cross their threshold. He's now working day and night to pay for child support. The woman he cheated with was also served with divorce papers and apparently returned to her parents' house with her child. According to her husband, her parents are furious and she's going to be working like a horse with no time for leisure while they're around. Thus, we were able to properly punish Daniel for his terrible betrayal. To be frank, there were plenty of things that stressed me out, and I felt quite worn out. Nonetheless, I felt a sense of relief having been able to administer divine retribution for the betrayal that persisted for so many years. Since then, I've moved and have been living peacefully in a new place. I still meet up often with the friend who helped me during that time, enough to chat about how tough it was back then. Having experienced such a harsh betrayal, I've had enough of married life for a while. I guess I'll be living on my own for a bit. It's my life, after all, so I've started to think that's okay. From now on, I want to live for myself.
I married you to take care of her, remember? My husband said with a smirk as he lugged a massive black suitcase behind him and stepped out through the front door, leaving his bedridden mother and me behind. He was off to Hawaii with a skip in his step. I couldn't believe he was going on a vacation, leaving his ailing mother. Although he was never the most considerate man, this was a new law that left me speechless. I swore to myself he'd pay. At that moment, my mother-in-law stood up with a smile and said, "Let's go us two." I was so taken aback, I didn't know how to respond. "Go where?" I managed to ask. She just grinned back at me and twinkled in her eye. "My name's Susan. I'm 42. I met my husband at work. We became close after many shared coffee breaks and got married when I was 33. I quit the job after marriage. Since then, I've been working part-time at the daycare center, using my degree in early childhood education to contribute to our household expenses, all while managing the house. Both my parents are no longer here. Both of my parents passed away from cancer. It happened when I was 30. My father passed first, and my mother followed soon after. I've been pouring all the love they left behind into my mother-in-law and the kids at the daycare. My mother-in-law treats me with such kindness. That alone makes my marriage to my husband worthwhile. I truly love her. Sadly, we've been unable to have children, and now I'm this old. It's really heartbreaking that I can't show her the face of her grandchild. I feel really sorry about it. Moreover, my husband tended to vent his frustration on her, which fills me with guilt. Why can't my husband cherish his own blood-related parent? Although his behavior toward her at home is appearing, he takes good care of her in public, which stops me from getting angry at him. To make up for it, I rented an apartment about a 15-minute drive from her house, so I can easily check up on her living alone. It was during one of those days when I was doing housework after finishing my job. My cell phone rang. It was from my husband, who should have been at work. "Hello? What's happened?" When I answered, I could hear the distress in my husband's voice. Well, according to him, my sprightly mother-in-law had fallen and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. I was shocked and worried. She was such an active, healthy woman. "She is at the hospital right now, but I can leave work. Could you go to the hospital instead?" he asked. I agreed immediately, and after taking off my apron, I rushed to the hospital he had mentioned. Upon reaching, I found my mother-in-law lying there, dressed in a patient gown. I'm sorry you had to come. It would have been better if John was here. Seeing the genuine regrets on my mother-in-law's face, I was flustered. Don't apologize. You're like my real mother. It's only natural for your daughter to come. You always put me in your debt, Susan. Thank you. Her normally vibrant smile was dimmed. It was sad to see her so unlike herself. From what I gathered, she had been knocked over by a large man on the street and had fallen down. I heard that the big man had fled, feigning ignorance. I learned that there had been a police incident before I arrived, and to avoid burdening my exhausted mother-in-law, I sat down and called the doctor to ask the details. But luckily enough, she hadn't fractured her hip, but rather the part of her back close to it. She would need to be hospitalized for a bit, but I was told she would be fine with physical therapy after that. This brought me some relief. Hey, I hate to ask, but could you go to the hospital and take care of Mom for a while? My husband said as soon as he came home. I had already informed about the severity of the injury and doctor's advice to him over the phone. I sighed at the sound of his voice, which didn't seem apologetic at all even as he said sorry. But you'll at least visit her, right? I asked my husband, who always made plans to go out on Saturdays and Sundays, but he let out an exaggerated sigh and said, No, I got plans on the weekends. I've been invited to play golf and drink by my boss. I can't say no to that. I was so shocked that I couldn't say a word. But she's your mother. As I said this, my husband just said with a faint smile, So what? My job comes first. I leave everything to you. Oh, and I've already eaten. With that, he stripped off his suit and headed for the bathroom. It was his usual routine, but I thought this was too strange, even for him. He often ate dinner before coming home, but his boss couldn't be so terrible as to prevent him from even paying a visit. At the moment, I made up my mind, but not yet. The real challenge was still ahead. I decided to take a leave of absence from work due to needing to prepare for things like changing clothes, since the hospitalization would last about a month. My director gave me his approval willingly, and so a month passed. In the end, my husband didn't visit even once. I didn't feel angry anymore. I was just tired of my husband. That was 2 days before her discharge. It's about Mom. When I asked him what he meant, my husband unilaterally continued the conversation. After her discharge, I was to take care of her, and to do that, I would have to live with my mother-in-law in her house. All of this was up to me, and since he didn't know when he would return, he would have to keep our rented apartment as it is. Since my mother-in-law still needed physical therapy and nursing care, I decided to extend my leave of absence. Although the number of children to take care of increasing during the summer vacation, my director kindly said, Please manage it properly. While my mother-in-law was now able to sit up in bed, she still needed help from others. That is, if she was left alone, she would become bedridden. I rented a remote control electric reclining bed for my mother-in-law's room, bought a bouquet the next day, and went to pick up my mother-in-law who was being discharged. My mother-in-law was very pleased to receive the bouquet and thanked me many times. My husband didn't come. I knew why, but I didn't do anything for now. Doing all the housework and caring for my mother-in-law was hard but not painful. I found it heartwarming to see her gradually recovering. I had been living in my mother-in-law's house for 3 months. It was around the time when her health started to improve. My husband, who hadn't provided any care to his biological mother for those 3 months, instead often being madly running off to our rental house, was now in good spirits. Next to him was a large black suitcase. Where are you planning to go? Even though I already knew the answer, yet I dared to ask. It's Hawaii, baby. Gotta burn through some PDO. I'll be there for a week. I married you for the caregiving, so I'm counting on ya. As he left, looking down on me, he picked up his large suitcase, opened the front door, and left. He cheerfully left his bedridden mother and me behind, headed off to Hawaii. How could he leave his own mother, who needs care, and go on a trip? He's always been a man without much empathy, but this was just too much. It left me speechless. I will make him suffer. That's when my mother-in-law, smiling, rose to her feet. Well, let's go ourselves. I was so surprised to see her suddenly stand up that I couldn't react properly. Where to? I asked in return. She said with a sparkling smile. To our new home. My mother-in-law said it with a carefree tone. However, I was more concerned about her injury. Mother-in-law, when were you able to get out of bed? I was bored being alone, so I started doing physical therapy. There's nothing wrong with my bones anymore. I'm sorry for keeping it a secret. I just wanted to surprise you. My mother-in-law laughed cheerfully. My vibrant mother-in-law was back. However, I was still in a state of confusion. I'm glad to see you standing, but a new home? When I asked, my mother-in-law responded in a bright voice. Yes, let's get everything moved while he's gone. Don't worry, I had a modern house built just 3 stations away. We can move with just one phone call. Then my mother-in-law told me something unexpected. She had received a large sum of money from the insurance after my father-in-law, who had passed away in a car accident. A friend she met at daycare had offered to rent this house. I didn't think this house, as small and old as it is, was enough to leave to you. She said the new house was barrier-free, considering our old age. It was already around the time I got injured, and while I was deciding when to move, this whole situation came about. But my mother-in-law continued. Now I can repay you for your kindness. Let's quickly call the movers and get this done. She chuckled, and I couldn't help but smile too. We rented a wheelchair for my mother-in-law, who could stand but still found walking difficult. We took a medical transport taxi and headed to our new home. The new home looked like a church, complete with a yard. It was a 2-story, stand-alone house. That day, we asked the movers to transfer everything except my husband's personal belongings. Setting up little things like plates was one thing, but getting the larger pieces like wardrobes places correctly, and then just turning on the electricity and gas was another. My mother-in-law had quickly arranged it all over the phone. Susan, thank you so much. Out of the blue, she said this to me as we were settled down, eating takeout. Oh no, you don't need to thank me. What she said next took me by surprise. It's alright. I know everything. It seems like we ended up hiring the same private investigator. Suddenly, it clicked. I realized she knew that I knew why my husband had gone to Hawaii. You knew? She nodded sadly. Well, I am his mother, after all. I knew something was off. Now, what should we do? I had made up my mind. Let's decide when he returns from Hawaii. A week had passed since my husband left for Hawaii. My cell phone rang, notifying me of a call from my husband. As I expected, I thought to myself and picked up the phone. Hey, what's going on? I can open the house and no one's answering the doorbell. Where are you? I inadvertently grimaced at his loud voice. The house keys have been changed for the new resident. Your belongings are at your place. Hearing this, my husband shouted in frustration. What? What's happening? I patiently explained to my clueless husband. Your mother's house is hers, not yours, and the only house under your name is rented apartment. So, even though it was hassle, I moved all your stuff to the apartment. As expected, my husband blew up. what's with your attitude? Where are you? At the apartment? I let out a sigh. I can't tell you where I am. Your things are packed in suitcase. So why don't you go back to the apartment quickly and maybe call your mistress? Suddenly, my husband was flustered. What? How do you? I sighed again. Reflect on your actions. I had a private investigator look into it because I was suspicious. I'm prepared for divorce. Wait, let me at least talk to ma'am. Mother-in-law, John would like to talk to you. What do you think? I turned to my mother-in-law sitting on the bed. May I borrow your phone for a moment? My mother-in-law said this with a smile, so I handed over my cell phone with a smile too. Oh, Mom, come on, you're kidding, right? Enough with the jokes. My mother-in-law said, pretending to be surprised. Are you still saying such things? Even after having an affair? Don't you have any shame? It seems like I may have gone wrong in bringing you up. Everything Susan is saying is correct. There is nothing more to add. After saying that, she handed the phone back to me, still smiling, and added, If you have something to say, go ahead. I'm sorry. It seems like I read him not properly, so it led to you marrying such a foolish and overly optimistic person. My mother-in-law spoke loudly, making sure the voice could be heard on the other end of the phone. Well, that's how it is. She unilaterally hung up the phone and turned it off for now. We are now in our long-awaited new home. We had just finished the morning chores and were having a casual conversation with my mother-in-law. Her room was the spacious garden view room. My room was on the second floor. The living room and kitchen were on the first floor. I opened my cell phone on the small shelf, and finally my mind settled and laughter welled up within me. My mother-in-law was also smiling warmly and kindly. It felt good. Now, how did we end up in this situation? Well, believe it or not, my mother-in-law was also using the same private investigation agency to investigate my husband's whereabouts. The reason the agency didn't inform us was because they had a strict confidentiality obligation towards the client, and it was effective within families, so they couldn't say anything. My resourceful and energetic mother-in-law had been skillfully using the phone while doing physical therapy on her bed. Her proactive nature was truly admirable. It turned out that my husband had been cheating for quite some time. Furthermore, his outings with his boss were actually visits to strip clubs. His affair partner was a woman from one of their business partners. Apparently, he approached her himself while she was working as a salesperson. It's such a ridiculous story. I wish I could return all the time I spent living with such a person. That's why I intended to hire a lawyer and get a divorce. It might make my husband happy as well. He can fully indulge in his beloved saleswoman. It remains to be seen what will happen when his facade crumbled. A few days later, please, don't divorce me. I've never seen my husband so pathetic before. When I went to the apartment to pick up some of my stuff, he suddenly appeared and apologized. Why? You have someone else, don't you? I naturally replied. In response, my husband burst into tears. He can't handle doing household chores on his own. His affair with the saleswoman was purely a way to fulfill his desires, and he never thought of marrying her seriously. And above all, my mother-in-law said she wants to sever ties with him when he got divorced. Those factors have piled up, and it seems like my husband is at his wit's end. Honestly, I couldn't care less about what happened with his affair partner, and I don't have even a tiny bit of love or sympathy left for my husband. And there's one more thing. If we get divorced, my mother-in-law has offered to adopt me. Apparently, it's her way of repairing me. I was delighted by the idea because I love my mother-in-law, but it also puzzled me since we don't have any grandchildren. Nevertheless, my mother-in-law strongly urged me to go through with the adoption. One reason is that she wants to live together, but There's also an underlying motive. She wants to transfer all her inhabitants to me because she feels responsible for the trouble her incompetent son caused. My mother-in-law is seriously intent on severing ties with her son, so I must also face this situation seriously. To be honest, I was truly happy about it. When she proposed the adoption, I even cried at first, having lost my parents at a young age and been betrayed by my husband. My mother-in-law's smile was my only solace. "You're getting what you deserve for neglecting your mother-in-law. Now you have no choice but to be alone," I said coldly. "Can I at least talk to my mom? My mother-in-law has no intention of talking to you anymore. If you keep insisting, I'll call the police. What will you do?" Upon hearing this, my husband burst into tears while making sounds. I looked at his face expressionlessly. Since the discussion with my husband didn't go well, we ended up hiring a lawyer and leaving into the family court. The result was, of course, in my favor. Thanks to his infidelity and visits to strip clubs, I was able to divorce him smoothly, even though he argued. Although my savings, which I had planned to use for building a house someday, were halved in the division of assets, I don't mind. My mother-in-law's condition has been steadily improving, and by the time the trial was over, she had fully recovered and even resumed her works. Today, we are celebrating the completion of the adoption process by dining at the fancy restaurant. Having a meal while chatting happily truly brings me happiness, and I am thrilled that she treats me not only as a real daughter, but even more affectionately. In the future, it's likely that I will need to provide constant care for my mother-in-law, but I have no complaints. In any case, my mother-in-law seems to have truly had enough of my ex-husband, so she decided to break off relations with her son and never meet again. I had already had the lawyer prepare a document for severing ties when the time came, and to ensure that I didn't receive any phone calls from my ex-husband. My mother-in-law had set up call rejection for his calls. By request, I did it for her. By the way, I heard from a former co-worker the other day. My mother-in-law is waiting with a gentle smile for the construction. John seems to be unable to pay the rent and utilities on his own, so he borrows money from his boss every month. My mother-in-law covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh dear, I feel sorry for him." "That's right," I said with a smile. "He has borrowed money from various financial institutions as well. The reason for the divorce has leaked through my friends, and it seems that he is not respected by his superiors, and the story of infidelity had spread, making him feel uncomfortable at work. It's quite satisfying. While it is said that one should not take pleasure in the misfortunes of others, I used to believe that it didn't apply to me. But now, it's different. When it comes to my ex-husband, the misfortunes of others are indeed sweet. While enjoying a fancy dinner, I wished for further misfortune upon my ex-husband."
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. "What is that idiot doing?" "All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. "If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you." I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.